I was in my kitchen making a pot of coffee when my daughter walked through the front door without knocking. She never knocks anymore, hasn't for years. I used to say something about it. Now I just watch the door swing open and remind myself she grew up in this house, that her fingerprints are probably still on the walls somewhere behind the photos I hung when she left for college. It was a Tuesday in early October, the kind of morning where the light comes in low and gold through the window above the sink, and the neighborhood is quiet enough that you can hear the school bus 2 streets over. I had my robe on, my reading glasses were pushed up on my head. I was 63 years old and I had nowhere to be, and that felt, at that moment, like something close to grace. My daughter walked in with her coat still on and a folder tucked under her arm. "Morning, Mama," she said. But she didn't look at me when she said it. She was already pulling out a chair at the kitchen table. I poured a second mug, set it in front of her. She opened the folder. I should tell you a little about my daughter before I tell you what happened next, because context matters. She's 41, smart as a whip, always has been. Got her MBA from a school in Atlanta that cost me more than I care to admit, back when I was still working full-time at the county hospital, and her father was alive to help carry things. She married a man named, well, I call him my son-in-law, and most days that's about as charitable as I can be. He runs some kind of consulting firm. I've never fully understood what he consults about. My daughter says financial strategy. Her father, God rest him, used to say he talks people out of their money and calls it advice. They've been married 14 years. They live about 20 minutes from me, in a neighborhood with a gate and a fountain that runs year-round, even in winter, which always struck me as wasteful. They drive matching SUVs. They take 2 vacations a year, sometimes 3, always somewhere with a coastline. I tell you all of this not to be uncharitable. I tell you this because when my daughter sat down at my kitchen table that October morning and slid a packet of papers toward me, I needed you to understand that she was not a woman who was struggling. She was a woman who had decided she wanted more. The papers were from a mortgage company. "What is this?" I said. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug the way she used to do as a little girl. It was a habit I recognized, something she did when she was nervous or when she wanted something she already knew was wrong to want. "It's a refinance," she said. "On the house." "My house." "Yes, ma'am." I sat down. I looked at the papers. There were a lot of them. The kind of stack that's designed to be overwhelming, to make you feel like resistance would be foolish because clearly a great deal of thought has already been put into this. I know that trick. I spent 31 years working in hospital administration. I've seen paperwork used as a weapon. "Walk me through it," I said. She did. The short version, her husband's firm was in trouble. Not catastrophic trouble, she said, but the kind of trouble that required a ridge. A short-term infusion of capital to cover some contracts that had fallen through. She used phrases like temporary liquidity issue and 18-month runway and market correction. She'd clearly rehearsed this. What she was asking, stripped of all the MBA language, was this. She wanted me to take out a second mortgage on my home, the house I have lived in for 27 years, the house her father and I bought together, the house where she learned to ride a bike in the driveway, where I nursed her father through his last 8 months, so that her husband could keep his business afloat. She wanted $140,000. I picked up my coffee. I took a slow sip. I looked at her over the rim of the mug. "Is that so?" I said. Not as a question, just as a thing I said. She kept talking. "The interest rate was favorable," she said. "The equity in my house was just sitting there. I wasn't getting any younger. And didn't I want to see my grandchildren?" She said grandchildren, plural, though she only has one, a 7-year-old I adore, set up for the future. She brought my grandchild into it. I let her finish. I've always let people finish. It's something I learned from my mother, who used to say that the wisest thing you can do in an argument is give a fool enough rope. When she was done, I said, "I'll think about it." She looked relieved. She shouldn't have. After she left, I sat in that kitchen for a long time. I didn't cry. I'm past the age of crying over things I should have seen coming. And truthfully, I should have seen this coming. Not this specific thing, not the folder, not the mortgage papers, but something. The phone calls that started about 6 months earlier, the questions about the house's current market value, my son-in-law asking, too casually, whether I'd ever thought about downsizing. I'd thought he was being passive-aggressive. He's always been a little passive-aggressive. But no, he'd been doing reconnaissance. I called my oldest friend, a woman I've known since we were both 19 years old and working summer jobs at the same department store. I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "She did not." "She did," I said. "With the folder and everything." "With the folder and everything." Another pause. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to think," I said. "Then I'm going to make some calls." The first call I made was to my attorney. I've had the same attorney for 16 years, a woman I found after my husband died, and I suddenly had to navigate probate and deed transfers and a life insurance policy that was more complicated than it had any right to be. She picks up on the second ring, always. I don't know how she does it. I told her the situation. She was quiet in a different way than my friend had been, a professional quiet, the kind that means someone is already thinking 3 steps ahead. Then she said, "Do you know about the deed?" I said, "What about it?" She said, "Pull it out. Look at how your name appears." I knew where my husband's papers were. I have always known. I went to the filing cabinet in the small room I use as a study. We called it the study, though really it was too small for a desk, so the desk is pushed against the wall at an angle, and I found the deed. Our names, mine and my husband's. And underneath, in the way these documents are arranged, the designation that my attorney had asked me to look for. She'd drawn my attention to it some years back, quietly, when we were updating other documents after my husband passed. At the time, I'd noted it and moved on. Now I held the paper up to the light and read it carefully. The deed was written in a way that included a right of survivorship clause, but more importantly, when my husband passed, the title had been updated. It now listed not only my name, but my brother's name as co-trustee of the property, held under a revocable living trust we'd set up in 2019, specifically to protect the asset. My daughter didn't know about the trust. She knew about the house. She did not know that the house was no longer simply mine to mortgage, that any lien or refinance against the property would require the signature and consent of the co-trustee, my brother, who is a retired postal supervisor from Decatur, Georgia, and who has approximately zero patience for nonsense. I sat with that paper for a while. Then I called my brother. He came the next weekend. He drove up from Decatur on a Saturday, which meant he left before dawn, which meant he took this seriously without me having to tell him to. That's the thing about family you can trust. You don't have to explain the stakes. They read them in your voice. I made biscuits. We sat at the same table where my daughter had sat with her folder, and I showed him the papers she'd left behind. He read everything slowly. He reads the way our father read, with his whole face, frowning a little as he works through the logic of each sentence. When he finished, he set the papers down. He drank his coffee. He said, "She thought you were going to sign this." I believe she did. "What does your attorney say?" "She says there's nothing they can do without your signature. The trust is clear." He nodded. He looked out the window at the backyard. The garden I tend, the old oak that drops leaves every fall in a way my husband used to find irritating, and I've always found beautiful. "Then it's simple," he said. "We don't sign." "It's not entirely simple," I said. "She's my daughter." He looked at me. "I know she is." We were quiet for a while, the way people are when they've known each other their whole lives and don't need to perform understanding. "What I want to know," he said, "is what her husband told her to get her in that chair, because my niece didn't walk in here with a folder of mortgage papers because she woke up one day and decided to be greedy. Somebody put her up to it." I'd thought the same thing, but I hadn't said it out loud until he did. We started comparing notes. He'd run into my son-in-law at a family gathering the previous summer, my grandson's birthday party, and he mentioned that my son-in-law had asked him a question. At the time, he'd thought it was small talk. Now it looked different. My son-in-law had asked him, casually, whether I'd ever mentioned setting up any legal structures around my property. My brother had said he didn't know anything about my business. My son-in-law had smiled and said, of course, just curious." He'd been trying to find out if the trust existed, and my brother, without knowing what he was protecting, had protected it anyway simply by saying nothing. I called my daughter the following Monday. I didn't tell her about the trust. Not yet. I asked her to come by for dinner. Real dinner, the kind I cook, not takeout, because I knew that a shared meal would soften what I had to say and make it possible to say it true. She came. Her husband did not. I'd asked her to come alone, and to her credit, she did. I made her favorite. Smothered chicken, rice, the green beans from the garden that I put up in jars back in August. I set the table the way my mother used to set it, with the good plates and the cloth napkins, because I believe the way you set a table communicates whether you're having a conversation or a confrontation. We ate. We talked about my grandson, his new teacher, how he's taken to reading, the thing he said last week that made the whole room laugh. My daughter is a good mother. That is one of the truest things I know about her, and I kept it at the front of my mind through all of it. After dinner, over tea, I told her I needed to understand a few things before I could give her my answer. I asked her how bad it really was. She looked at the table. When she finally looked up, the MBA language was gone. She said his firm had lost 2 major clients in 6 months. There was staff they couldn't pay, there was a line of credit that had been maxed, there was a payment coming due in 45 days that they couldn't cover. How much does he know about your finances separately from his? I asked. She frowned. We're married, Mama. It's all together. Is it? That landed. Because the truth, a truth she didn't fully know, was that her father and I had always kept one thing, very deliberately separate. When her father was alive, we maintained what we called a storm account, not a joint account, mine alone. Nothing dramatic, just the quiet knowledge that a woman should always have a place to stand when the floor falls out. When he died, I kept the practice. My daughter had known about it in the abstract, the way children know things their parents say, without really hearing them. She didn't know the number. She didn't know it was significant enough to matter. I said to her, your father taught me something when we were first married. He said, never let love make you foolish with the thing you'll need when love isn't enough. She was quiet. I love you, I said, and I am not going to mortgage my home. She didn't argue. That surprised me. I think some part of her had known, walking in with that folder, that this was wrong. Some part of her had been hoping I would say no, so she didn't have to be the one to say it. She cried a little. I let her. Then I told her about the trust. I watched her face move through the information, the confusion, then the understanding, then something that might have been relief. He didn't know, she said. It wasn't a question. No, I said. He didn't. He told me it was straightforward, that you could just… She stopped. He said you could just sign and it would be done in a few weeks. Did he help you prepare those papers? She was quiet for a long time. He had his assistant pull them together. I nodded. Sweetheart, I said, I need you to think very carefully about what that means. That your husband used his professional resources to draw up a legal strategy to access my property, and he told you it was simple, and he didn't tell you there might be protections in place. She sat with that. The thing I didn't say, the thing I let her arrive at on her own, was this. He hadn't told her about the trust because he'd already looked into it and hadn't found it. He'd asked my brother at a birthday party. He'd sent a version of my daughter in with a folder. He was several steps ahead of where he appeared to be, and her job in that scheme, whether she knew it or not, was to be the one I'd have a harder time saying no to. Her own mother. What happened next, I will tell you, because people always want to know, and because it's the part that matters for anyone who might be in a version of this same situation without knowing it yet. My daughter went home that night and had a conversation with her husband that I was not present for and cannot describe except through what she told me later. She asked him point blank what he had known about my property's legal structure. He told her he hadn't known anything. She asked him why his assistant had been involved in pulling the documents. He said it was just paperwork. She asked him what 45-day payment he was talking about, the one that had started all of this. He told her a number that was different from the one he told her a week before. She called me the next morning. She said, I think I need to talk to someone. I said, I know someone, and I gave her my attorney's number. It turned out that what my son-in-law had described as a temporary liquidity issue was, in fact, a situation that had been developing for nearly 2 years. There were debts she hadn't known about. There was a business structure that made her personally liable for some of them. The house they lived in, the one with the gate and the fountain, was heavily leveraged. He had not been solving a problem by coming to me. He had been trying to move a problem. I will not pretend the months that followed were easy. My daughter had to make decisions I wouldn't wish on anyone about her marriage, about her finances, about what she was willing to rebuild and what she wasn't. There were lawyers. There were long phone calls with me late at night when my grandson was asleep and she could speak freely. There were days when I think she was angrier at me than she was at him, because sometimes a person needs somewhere to put the grief before they can look at the truth. I let her be angry. I kept the phone on. What I will tell you is where things stand now, because endings matter. My son-in-law's firm closed. He negotiated a settlement on the business debts that left my daughter's personal credit intact, largely because my attorney got involved early enough to draw a clean line between what was hers and what was his. She and my grandson moved in with me for 4 months. 4 months that were, in some ways, some of the best months I have had in this house since before my husband got sick. We cooked together. We watched movies. My grandson figured out that the old oak in the backyard is good for climbing if you start from the left side. My daughter filed for separation in the spring. She is not okay, but she is getting there. Those are different things, and I think women of a certain age know the difference. My house is still mine, paid off, protected, still standing. The deed is in the filing cabinet in the small room I use as a study, and if you pressed me, I couldn't tell you exactly when I first understood that a piece of paper in a filing cabinet could be an act of love across time. But it is. My husband put our names on it. My attorney helped me protect it. My brother, without knowing the whole story, refused to give away what wasn't his to give. I think about that Tuesday in October a lot. The gold light through the kitchen window, the sound of the school bus 2 streets over, my daughter walking in with her coat still on and that folder under her arm. I think about how close I might have come to signing something if I hadn't known what I knew, if my husband hadn't been the man he was, if I hadn't had the presence of mind 11 years ago to sit in a law office and set up a trust because a woman I barely knew yet told me it was worth doing. Here is what I want you to hear if you're listening to this and you're a woman of a certain age and you have children who love you and a home you've poured your life into. The paperwork matters. The deed matters. The name on the trust matters. Not because your children are bad, mine is not bad, and maybe yours are not either, but because life puts people under pressure, and pressure makes people do things they wouldn't otherwise do, and the best protection you can give everyone you love is to make sure that when the pressure comes, there is nothing left vulnerable for it to find. Go talk to an attorney. This week, not someday. If you're not sure where to start with that. One call, one conversation. My husband used to say, the best umbrella is the one you bought before it rained. He was right about most things. He was right about that. I keep coming back to that Tuesday morning, the gold light through the kitchen window, my coffee going warm in the mug, while I read through papers that were designed to make me feel like saying yes was the only reasonable thing left to do. I've thought a lot about what would have happened if I hadn't known. If I'd never sat in that law office 11 years ago. If my husband hadn't been the kind of man who believed that love without forethought is just good intentions waiting to fail. I would have signed. I think I would have signed, because she is my daughter and I love her, and love without wisdom is just the most expensive gift you can give someone who isn't ready to receive it. That's the thing nobody tells you about consequences. They don't announce themselves. They accumulate quietly, like water behind a dam, until one day something gives. My son-in-law didn't wake up one morning and decide to be reckless. He made small choices, then slightly larger ones, and each time nothing collapsed immediately, he took that as permission. 2 years of that. 2 years before, he was sitting across a table trying to figure out how to move the damage somewhere it wouldn't touch him. What saved me wasn't luck. It was a decision I made when I was clear-headed, before anyone needed anything from me. That's the only time you can make a decision like that, before the pressure arrives, not during it, You're too close. During it, someone you love is sitting across from you with her hands wrapped around a coffee mug, and all the love in the room makes the paperwork look smaller than it is. My daughter did something hard in the months that followed. She could have stayed loyal to the version of events her husband was telling. A lot of women do. It's easier, for a while, to believe the story you've already built your life around than to pull at the thread that unravels it. But she had enough character in her to ask the questions she was afraid to ask, and enough clear-mindedness to listen to the answers, even when they changed everything. That takes something. I don't want to gloss over how much that takes. And then she had to keep going through the lawyers, through the separation, through the months of living in my house with her son, and starting over at 41. There were nights I heard her up past midnight, working. There were mornings she got my grandson ready for school with red eyes and a voice she'd steadied deliberately. She didn't fold. She bent, but she didn't fold. I think about my husband a lot at the end of all this. He used to say that the most important inheritance you can leave someone isn't money. It's the knowledge of how to protect themselves when you're no longer there to do it. He was a quiet man. He didn't say dramatic things often, but when he did, he meant them all the way through. He meant that one, the trust he helped me set up, the one that stopped everything, the one my son-in-law never found, that was his voice, still in the room, still looking out for the people he loved. That's what I think about when I talk about what we leave behind. Not just assets, not just paperwork, the thoughtfulness behind the paperwork, the care that went into making sure that when someone I love is standing in a kitchen with a folder and a problem, there is something solid underneath her, even if she doesn't know it yet. She knows it now. We both do.